Hi, everybody. Doug and Alea again. And in this episode, we would like to talk about emotions and developing emotional awareness and circle back to something we talked about in a previous uh, session about doing your inner work. And the way I want to start this is by sharing my story of how I came about all the work that I'm doing today and what I had to go through to become more emotionally self-aware. So you may not know this, but I was a trial lawyer for 22 years before I changed, and I went back to school mid-career to earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies, and I left the practice of law in 2000 to become a peacemaker and mediator. The problem that I faced, and I knew I had this problem for years, but I really never knew how to fix it, was that because of my upbringing and the fact that I was born with some pretty severe disabilities, I had a really difficult childhood and adolescence emotionally. And I became aloof and arrogant as a way of dealing with all of my emotional pain. And I was, of course, extremely emotionally defended and emotionally unavailable. I had a bright intellect, so that got me ultimately through law school, which was a perfect career and is the career for people who are aloof and arrogant and smart, uh, because the law, like many other professions, relies on critical thinking and rationality, and emotions don't have any place there except when you're making an argument to the jury. Well, that's what I thought. So for 22 years, I lived that life. Very successful trial lawyer, tried a lot of cases, but I was really miserable as a human being. Um, my first marriage didn't go so well, and ultimately I came across a book called Undefended Love by Jet Sarsis, which I can recommend. And Jet and her partner are therapists in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they've really got a really cool approach to this work. I went up and had a session with Jet, and then I took a workshop from her. And the one thing that really stood out from me in this workshop was the idea that you should never run from your emotions. If you have an intense emotional experience, what you should do, assuming you're in a place where you can do it, is allow yourself to dive deep into that pool, into that emotional pool. And they described it as a situation where you feel like you're going to be annihilated. I mean, you just don't feel like you're ever going to come out of it again. But emotions only last 3 or 4 minutes. And they describe the idea of when you do this and you just confront your emotions and ride them and don't fight them and just absorb them and expand them and make them your total existence for 3 or 4 minutes, they will break their release on you. They'll break their hold on you. Well, I understood this intellectually. And one day, several years later, many years later, really, I was driving up the highway to my mountain home and I passed the road where I used to live. And I was all of a sudden overcome with incredible waves of grief. I mean, it was overwhelming. Now, what I would have done in the past is I would have just pushed it down. And I said, I can tough through this and, I'm not going to feel this. But this time I decided to do something different. I pulled over to the side of the road and I just allowed myself to do what Jet had described for me, which is dive into the grief and the sadness and the full emotional experience. And I did. And I did feel like I was going to be annihilated. Yeah, it took courage because you really feel like your existence is going to be snuffed out by this overwhelming emotional experience. But just like she said, the experience, you go very deep and then you come up for air and it's all over with. And the emotion passed. It was like a gigantic wave. It finally passed. I came back to normal reality. And that emotional charge, all that sadness and grief that I'd accumulated over many, over 50 years of charge, had completely dissipated. And that's when I began to become emotionally self-aware. And I think that's the big secret. Now, why is it that we don't do this? Well, we don't do this because our culture is biased against emotions. We live under the myth of rationality, that human beings are rational and not emotional. We have an educational system that does not teach us how to become emotionally competent. We are raised in families that, for the most part, are emotionally incompetent, and raise emotionally incompetent children to become emotionally incompetent adults and emotionally incompetent parents. Uh, and we emotionally invalidate each other. We constantly put down and dismiss and judge and criticize each other for having emotional experiences, so that the entire environment that we live in and grow up in is all anti-emotional, and no one is ever out there to guide us and teach us and coach us how to deal with these really strong, difficult emotions like grief and despair and sadness and abandonment and feeling unloved and worthless. So fortunately, there are teachers like Jet out there who have the wisdom to see through all of this and guided me through this initially. And then I had to, but at the end of the day, you have to do it on your own. And the secret really is having the courage to just find a quiet time and dive into that, what looks like a cesspool, and just wallow in it. And that's that way you come out the other side clean and clear. And you're no longer afraid of your emotions, and now you can start developing the tools that will allow you to be emotionally competent. Alea?
Beautiful aspects, and it does take a lot of courage. And I'm going to talk about emotions and give you some practices, the tools, the how of how to manage those emotions. When you are dealing with emotions, it can be really scary, like Doug was talking about. And there are a couple processes. It's the how of how to navigate these emotional experiences, because one of the biggest things with emotions that Doug mentioned is that when you do go into your emotions, when they come up, it actually helps you cultivate more self-awareness. And in your journey of becoming more actualized, more enlightened, more connected, awareness is absolutely key. And building awareness, becoming more aware of what you're doing, is probably one of the hardest things to teach to do. And when you have challenges in your life and you don't know why you have the challenges, or you want to change the challenges, we have to become aware of what we're doing that's creating the challenges. And so how do you become more aware? We actually use the emotions to cultivate more self-awareness. And when you feel a particular emotion or you're in a challenge that's really uncomfortable, you could think of it like a tap tap on the shoulder or slap slap in the face if it's really painful and uncomfortable, super scary. It's getting your attention. When something gets your attention, you now have the ability to be more aware. And so one of the first processes that I'll share with you about how to use your emotions is to take a deep breath in. You pull yourself into what I call the divine line, river of light, front of spine. And as you pull your energy and awareness into your divine line, you let yourself feel the emotion that's coming up for you. And maybe you name it. But if you don't even know what the emotion is, it might be a combination of like grief, sadness, fear, anger, resentment, whatever it might be. Just let yourself start feeling all of the energy and play with it like a vibration. And you can ask yourself, if this thing that I'm feeling were an element, what element would it be? We're demystifying the emotional experience. We're making it less scary. Would you be a huge wave of water? Would you be a whirlpool, a tsunami, a fire breathing dragon, a forest fire? Would you be a huge glacier moving and carving into mountains? Would you be a mountain? Would you be snow? Would you be a storm, rain? Would you be wind? What aspect of the nature kingdom would this emotion be? And then if you can identify that, like, oh, this feels like fire. It's like a huge volcano. If you're feeling the anger, or grief, would be this huge torrential downpour. Then you would feel into that and you would say, okay, how big? How many days of a torrential storm? How many inches would that be? How huge of a fire would it be? Name the size of it, or it would just be little. And then feel into the temperature, the color, the light, the aroma. You're going into the emotional experience by linking it with aspects of the nature kingdom that then help you actually experience it in less of a scary way. And then as you go into the emotion, naming all of these things, becoming more aware of it, feeling yourself in the form of a mountain or a river or a storm or tsunami in an appropriate dimension where you're not causing harm, then what starts to happen is you're using the energy in motion, like a vibration, and you're using that emotion to change your vibration, specifically the body. And there is a core concept that I teach and practice in my daily cups and tall cups, my classes, group sessions. And it's thinking about emotions as the body's primary mechanism to evolve, to mature, change its vibration, to move into a higher consciousness, to cultivate self-awareness, to cultivate a greater sense of connection. And when we're in an emotional experience that we can't even like perceive, like, what, how is that really even possible? But think about an emotional experience that you had at some point in time. And after the emotional experience, once you've gone through the storm, do you somehow feel a little more empowered and a little stronger? Or do you just feel crushed, but then a little more humble? Something happened to you. There was a shift inside you that that emotion created. Emotions are there to change our vibration, which changes our consciousness. And so when we go into it and we let ourselves feel that emotion like vibration, using the elements of the nature kingdom, it then creates a vibrational shift in the body. There's one other strategy of the how that I use with clients, with myself, and it's the visual of we're experiencing an emotion and we imagine a kiddie pool. So you know those little kiddie pools that you can buy at Walmart, you splash around in. We got one for our little dog, Emmy. She splashes around in her kiddie pool or doggy pool. And when you're having an emotion, you imagine yourself sitting in a kiddie pool and sloshing around in your kiddie pool, and the kiddie pool is filled with the emotion of grief or fear or sadness. And you just keep sloshing around. You might even actually do that with your physical body, sloshing around in your kiddie pool, feeling it, kind of rolling around in it, getting all sloshed around in it until you slosh all of the emotions out of the kiddie pool and the kiddie pool is bone dry. In a higher dimension, in some other realm, you, soul rider, in your body, we're just using this energy to slosh around in it to change your vibration. So play with using the elements of the nature kingdom or the kiddie pool to use the emotions to cultivate more awareness, to cultivate a greater degree of connection with your essence, and essentially hold a greater perspective of divine connection, which then moves you into a place of seeing everything from a connected place, as opposed to a perception of disconnection, which creates a state of suffering. I'm not saying this is easy, but these are tools that Doug and I have cultivated over the last decade of helping people, helping ourselves when we are in times of challenge and struggle. And I also have a YouTube on my channel, on my YouTube channel called Ride the Waves of Emotion. And it talks about another technique of essentially riding the wave, letting the wave move through you. And so you can check that YouTube out if that calls to you of another strategy to use the emotions to cultivate more awareness, more connection, and change your vibration.